The twin sons of Drakthir burned high in the sky, turning the palace walls into shimmering gold. The air was thick with heat, and the sound of dragon roars rolled over the city like thunder. People in the streets stopped what they were doing and glanced nervously at the high towers. They all knew the sound. It meant the prince's dragons were hungry again. In the royal kitchen, dozens of alien chefs ran back and forth, their skin glistening under the steam. They stirred massive iron cauldrons, threw handfuls of strange spices into boiling sauces, and sliced slabs of alien meat that hissed when it touched the hot pans. But no matter how much they cooked, nothing pleased the dragons. Every dish was rejected, every plate smashed. The huge beasts roared in fury and shook the palace walls. The alien prince sat on his throne of black stone, his crown made of a dragon's curved horn, his face twisted with annoyance. His voice carried through the hall. "Enough of this," he declared. "No more excuses, no more failures. I want food that my dragons will eat, or heads will roll." The court fell silent, all eyes turned to the head advisor, who swallowed hard and said, "My prince, there is one more option." Whispers spread like wind in dry grass. One more option meant desperation. The advisor cleared his throat. "We have summoned a human from the distant planet Earth." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Gasps and laughter followed. The courtiers mocked the idea. A human? Feeding dragons? They can't even survive our spices, let alone cook for our beasts. But the prince did not laugh. His eyes narrowed in curiosity. An hour later, the gates to the throne room opened. A man in simple white chef's clothes walked in, his step steady, his gaze calm. He did not bow too low, nor did he look afraid. He had the hands of someone used to knives and fire, but his eyes studied the room like a man reading a recipe he'd never seen before. The prince leaned forward. "You are the human chef?" he asked. The man nodded. "Yes, your highness." The alien prince stood, his height towering over the human, his voice deep and sharp. "Your task is simple, human. You will cook a dish for my dragons. If they eat it, you will be rewarded. If they refuse, you will be thrown to them as dessert." The court erupted in cruel laughter. The chef simply replied, "Understood." The prince's clawed hand pointed toward the far side of the hall. Massive golden doors opened, and the ground shook as three enormous dragons entered. Their scales shone like molten metal. Their eyes burned like twin furnaces. Hot breath rolled from their nostrils, and each step was the sound of stone cracking. They sniffed the air and snarled, clearly unhappy with the alien chef's offerings. The human watched them carefully, not with fear, but with the curiosity of a craftsman seeing a challenge. He noticed how their nostrils flared at certain smells, how their eyes focused more on movement than on color, how they ignored the decorated plates but reacted to the faint sizzling sound of meat. These were details the alien chefs had missed. The prince's voice broke the silence. "You have 1 hour," he said. "Fail, and your bones will be polished for my dining table." The human chef nodded once more and followed the head advisor through a long, winding hallway to the royal kitchens. The advisor sneered. "You have no chance, human." The last 20 cooks could not please them. But the chef only replied, maybe they were cooking for themselves, not for the dragons. Inside the kitchen, the heat was intense. The smell of boiling alien spices was so strong it could make an untrained man choke. Alien cooks moved like frantic insects, cutting, stirring, yelling. They glanced at the human and shook their heads, some even muttered bets about how long he'd last. The chef ignored them, walking to an empty counter, placing his small leather bag on it and opening it slowly. Inside were ingredients from Earth, a pouch of sea salt, dried rosemary, garlic, black pepper, and a slab of fresh meat sealed tight. To the aliens, these looked dull and plain. But to him, they were the colors of a painting he knew by heart. He laid them out in careful order, sharpened his knife, and began to work. Every cut was precise, every movement steady. The sound of the knife on the board had a rhythm. He sprinkled salt and herbs, rubbed them into the meat, and let the scent rise. Already the alien assistants nearby paused to sniff the air. The sizzling began as he placed the meat over a flame. But unlike the alien fires that roared violently, his was controlled, patient, coaxing flavor instead of burning it away. The smell began to spread, a mix of savory meat, garlic, and herbs drifting into the hallway. 2 guards wandered in, pretending to check security, but actually following the scent. They stood watching, their eyes flicking between the pan and the chef's hands. The dragons in the hall shifted, their heads lifting as if catching something unusual. When the meat was done, the chef plated it simply, no strange decorations, just the food itself. Golden and glistening with juices, he looked at the advisor and said, "Tell the prince it is ready." The advisor raised an eyebrow, but a minute later, the human stood once more in the grand hall, carrying the dish toward 3 hungry dragons, their eyes fixed on him. And as he placed the plate before the largest one, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The largest dragon lowered its massive head toward the plate, steam curling from its nostrils, its golden eyes locked on the sizzling meat. The court held its breath. The prince leaned forward. The human chef stood still, not moving a muscle. The dragon sniffed once, twice, then snapped its jaws around the meat. The crunch of the first bite echoed in the high stone hall. The alien nobles waited for the roar of rejection, but it never came. Instead, the dragon's eyes closed halfway, its breathing slowed, and a low rumble of satisfaction rolled from deep in its chest. The sound made the other 2 dragons lift their heads. They stepped forward, their talons clicking on the polished floor, and began snapping at the plate before the first dragon had finished. Gasps spread through the crowd. Alien chefs dropped their ladles. The prince's eyes widened. "They like it," he said under his breath. The human gave a small nod. "They do," he replied simply. The other dragons fought for the last scraps, their long tongues curling around the meat like serpents. And for the first time in years, the hall was filled not with roars of rage but with the heavy, content breathing of full dragons. The alien prince rose to his feet, his voice carrying through the hall. "Human, you have done what no one in this galaxy could do." His tone was not just impressed, it was wary. He knew this man's skill was more than just cooking. It was influence, if a human could tame dragons with food, what else could he do? The prince's advisor stepped closer, whispering in his ear, "We must keep him here, your highness. His skills could change the balance of power." The prince nodded slightly, but aloud he said, "You will stay in my palace, human, from this moment forward. You are the royal flamekeeper." The title was an honor and a trap. It meant he was trusted, but also watched. The human chef bowed, hiding the glint of calculation in his eyes. "As you wish, your highness," he said. The dragons were still licking the stone floor when the prince ordered more food. "Feed them again, and again, until they sleep," he commanded. The chef returned to the kitchen, and that was when the trouble began. The royal kitchen was chaos. Fires roared in massive pits. Pots big enough to drown in boiled with strange stews. Alien cooks moved like a swarm, chopping, stirring, shouting. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp tang of alien spices. Some smelled so strong they made the eyes water and the throat burn. The human ignored the mocking glances, his mind already working on the next dish. A tall alien with ridged skin and 6 arms blocked his path, sneering, "Human, you think you're special because of one lucky dish? Dragons are beasts. They eat anything when they're starving." The chef didn't stop walking. "Then it should be easy for you to cook something they'll eat," he replied calmly. The alien cook snarled but didn't answer. At his counter, the human unpacked more earth ingredients: salt, black pepper, honey, lemon, rosemary. Things the alien cooks dismissed as too plain. He selected a different cut of meat this time, thicker, marbled with fat. He knew dragons were predators. They craved not just flavor, but the scent of fresh prey. He lit his own fire again, low and steady, letting the heat seep into the pan instead of blasting it with flame. He seared the meat slowly, turning it only once, letting the fat render and the herbs release their scent. The smell began to slip into every corner of the kitchen. Alien cooks stopped to sniff the air, then shook their heads as if trying to ignore it. But it was too late. The smell traveled beyond the kitchen, drifting into the hall. The dragons shifted restlessly, their claws tapping on the stone, their eyes glowing brighter. One let out a short, sharp roar that shook the serving tables. The prince smiled. "They can smell it," he murmured. By the time the chef plated the meat, the kitchen had gone silent except for the crackle of the fire. He drizzled a glaze made from honey and herbs over the top, the golden liquid catching the light. When he carried it back into the hall, the dragons were already moving toward him, their nostrils flaring. He set the plate down, and this time, all 3 dragons lunged at once, tearing into the meat with wild hunger. But there was no violence between them. Each took turns, each waited just enough for the other. The court watched in stunned silence. Dragons were known to kill each other over food, yet here they. The human caught the flicker of triumph in the prince's eyes, but also something else, a shadow of caution, as if he knew how dangerous this was for the man who made it possible. When the feast ended, the dragons lay down, their bellies full, their breathing calm. But before the hall could empty, an older noble with jagged teeth stood. "This is dangerous magic," he said loudly. "Dragons are meant to be wild, not tamed by a human's cooking." Others murmured in agreement. The tension in the room thickened. The prince rose slowly, his voice cold. "It is not magic, it is skill, and skill belongs to those strong enough to use it." The jagged-toothed noble bared his teeth but sat down. The human kept his eyes lowered, though he could feel the weight of many stares pressing against him. Later, in the quiet of the kitchen, he cleaned his tools. When a shadow moved behind him, he turned to see the largest dragon standing in the archway, its golden eyes glowing softly in the dim light. No guards, no prince, just the beast and the man. The dragon lowered its head until its eye was level with his. Its voice was a deep rumble in his mind, not spoken aloud. "Feed us, and we will guard you." The words sent a chill through him. It was the first time he realized the dragons were not just beasts, they understood, and somewhere beyond the palace walls, news of the day's feast had already left Drakthar, traveling on ships and whispers, reaching ears that would not be pleased. The next morning, the palace gates opened to a line of strange ships, their hulls marked with symbols from worlds far. Beyond Drakthar, banners from rival empires fluttered in the hot wind. Alien guards in bright armor marched inside, their boots striking the black stone. Behind them came envoys, lords, and warriors, all here for one reason. The Galactic Council had sent word, a challenge for the alien prince. They had heard the whispers that his dragons had been tamed by a human's cooking. The council feared this power, and so they summoned proof. They demanded the human chef prepare a dish that every species could eat, even those whose diets were deadly to others. Failure would not only shame the prince, but also weaken his hold on the council. The prince found the human in the kitchen, his expression unreadable. "You will cook for the galaxy," he said, "and you will not fail." His tone was more command than request. The chef simply nodded, though he knew what this meant. A mistake here could turn the whole galaxy against them. The challenge was impossible by alien standards. There were poison-blooded species who could not eat heat-spiced food, frost giants who would melt at the smell of hot broth, and shadow feeders who could only consume food that had never seen the sun. Alien chefs whispered that the human would die trying. He began his work without hesitation, but this time, the kitchen felt different. Strangers from other empires watched from the doorways, some taking notes, others with eyes cold as stone. The human kept his movements steady, his mind racing. He had to make a dish that was safe, flavorful, and respected by every species present. First, he divided the kitchen into stations, each for a different type of eater. He used his knowledge of Earth's many cuisines to adapt: chilled broths for frost giants, Mild grains for the poison-blooded, dark-smoked cuts of meat for the shadow feeders, each prepared with the same care and balance, no ingredient overpowering another. The smell in the air was strange yet harmonious, a blend of warm herbs, cool mint, earthy roots, and sweet spice. The scent traveled through the halls, and the waiting delegates grew restless. The dragons in their roosts stirred, not because they were hungry, but because they could sense the change in the palace air. Halfway through, a mistake almost ended it. One of the frost giant portions had been swapped with a heat-spiced tray. It would have killed them instantly. The human caught it just in time, his eyes darting toward the shadow in the corner where a figure had been watching. By the time he turned, the figure was gone. By the time the feast was ready, the sky outside had darkened with storm clouds. The great hall was filled with delegates, some seated, others standing, their faces wary. The human entered with the first tray. No grand decorations, no jeweled platters, just food, honest and steaming where it should steam, cold where it should be cold, the prince announced. From the hands of earth comes a meal for all. And stepped back, letting the humans serve, one by one. Each delegate tasted their portion. The frost giant's breath fogged the air as they swallowed the chilled broth, their heavy shoulders relaxing. The poison-blooded sipped the mild grains. Without flinching, the shadow feeders pulled their smoked meat close, the scent curling around them like a cloak. The hall was silent except for the sound of eating. Then came something no one expected. The delegates began to speak to each other. Species who had fought for centuries were now trading bites, asking questions, even laughing. The human stood back, watching it happen. He knew now what the dragons had shown him. Food could do what armies could not. But not all eyes in the hall were friendly. Lord Varkuth from the previous feast sat at the far end, his silver skin gleaming in the torchlight, his mouth twisted. In a thin smile he did not eat, he simply watched. When the last plate was cleared, he rose, his voice sharp. "This human is dangerous," he declared. "He bends beasts, and now he bends leaders. What will he bend next?" Murmurs spread through the hall like ripples on water. The prince stood, his voice like steel. "He bends nothing, he serves." His gaze cut toward Varkuth. "And those who fear service often fear their own weakness." The tension broke only when one of the frost giants raised his goblet and said, "I will remember this meal until my bones are dust." Others echoed the sentiment, and the council scribes began recording the day's event for the archives. As the hall emptied, the human returned to the kitchen, exhausted, but there, in the corner, stood the largest dragon, silent, watching. In his mind came the deep voice again. "You fed them. Now they will protect you. But more enemies will come." The dragon turned and left without another sound. Outside, lightning split the sky, and on distant worlds, news of the feast was already being twisted into stories, some calling it a miracle, others calling it a threat, and somewhere in the dark, plans were already forming to end the human chef before his next dish could change the galaxy again. The storm outside had not stopped since the council feast. Rain hissed against the molten rivers around the palace. Thunder rolled through the mountains. Inside, the air was tense. Guards doubled their patrols, and whispers followed the human chef through every corridor. It was 3 nights after the feast when the first attempt came. He had been in the royal kitchen late, preparing an early morning meal for the dragons. The other cooks had gone. The fire pits burned low. The smell of herbs and smoke hung heavy. As he reached for a spice jar, his hand froze. The lid was loose inside. The fine powder shimmered faintly under the light. He dipped a fingertip and touched it to his tongue. Bitter, metallic, deadly. Someone had poisoned his stock. Not the food for the prince, not for the dragons, but for him. A warning disguised as an accident. He closed the jar, tied it tight, and set it aside. Then locked his spice chest. The footsteps in the hall told him someone had been waiting for him to taste it. But when he looked, the hall was empty. The next day, the prince summoned him to the throne room, his voice heavy. "There are rumors, human, that you mean to poison me." The words were ice. The nobles around the hall watched with hungry eyes, some eager to see him fall. "They say you put something in the council's food to make them obey." The prince's claws tapped the arm of his throne. The human didn't raise his voice. "If I wanted them to obey, your highness, they would still be in your hall now," he said. "Food brings peace, but it cannot force loyalty." The prince studied him for a long moment, then waved a hand. "Prove it. Tonight you will cook for me, and for the one who accuses you." The human bowed. "As you wish." Back in the kitchen, the tension was worse. Two of the alien cooks had been replaced by strangers, their eyes too cold for simple workers. The human pretended not to notice. He began preparing a dish with care, choosing ingredients from his personal supply. This time, he added a spice from Earth no one in the palace had seen, a harmless pepper that left a faint heat in the throat. Dinner was set in the smaller royal chamber, the prince at one end, Lord Varkath at the other. The human served the meal himself. His hands steady, he placed the plates down, stepped back and waited. The prince took the first bite without hesitation. His sharp eyes watching Varkath, the silver-skinned noble hesitated, then cut a small piece and ate. Within moments, the heat of the pepper hit Varkath's throat, his eyes watered, his breathing caught. He coughed sharply. "Poison!" he shouted, but the prince didn't move. "No," the human said calmly. "This is an earth spice, harmless to all species here, but it has one effect. Liars cannot speak while the heat burns." All eyes turned to Varkath, who struggled to form words. The prince's gaze darkened. "Enough," he said. "You would frame my flamekeeper." The guards seized Varkath, dragging him from the chamber. The prince stood. "You have enemies, human. More than I expected, but you also have my dragons." His tone was strange, part warning, part trust. That night, the human walked back to his quarters. But when he opened the door, the largest dragon was inside, its massive body curled around the room, golden eyes glowing in the dark. Its voice rumbled in his mind. "They will try again. You must not walk alone." The chef stood in the doorway, the sound of the rain outside mixing with the dragon's deep breath. "Why protect me?" he asked, not expecting an answer, but the dragon spoke. "You fed us as no one has. You saw us not as weapons, but as living." It shifted its head closer. "And because you will be needed for what comes next." The words stayed with him. Long after the dragon left, the storm still raging outside, he lay in bed knowing that whatever came next would be bigger than palace politics, bigger than feasts, and somewhere beyond the dark mountains, ships were moving toward Drakthar, carrying those who had decided that the human chef had lived long enough. The day of the Great Alliance feast began under a blood-red sunrise. The sky over Drakthar streaked with deep clouds that glowed like burning coals. It was the first time in centuries that so many leaders from across the galaxy had gathered in one place. Their ships hung in the air above the city like silent predators. The alien prince had ordered this feast to seal new trade agreements, but everyone knew the truth. This was also a test. If the human chef could unite the most dangerous species under one roof without bloodshed, the prince's influence would grow beyond the council. But if the night ended in chaos, it would be the perfect excuse for his enemies to move against him. The royal kitchens roared with life, flames leaping high, knives flashing. The human chef stood at the center, his mind calm but alert. He had chosen his dish carefully, not for show, but for meaning. He would cook something that told a story, not of Earth's power, but of its heart. He began with a broth, rich but gentle, simmered slow until the scent filled the kitchen with warmth. Into it he placed vegetables from alien markets and grains from Earth, letting them soften together. He roasted meats until the skin crackled, brushed with honey and herbs, and prepared cold platters for those whose bodies could not handle heat. Every choice was deliberate, every flavor balanced to touch something familiar in every guest. Outside, the palace was heavy with tension. Guards stood double at every door. The dragons were restless in their roosts, their golden eyes fixed on the city below. They could smell the air, feel the unease. By evening, the great hall blazed with light. The leaders entered in robes, armor, and veils, their eyes sharp and searching. Some looked at the food with curiosity, others with suspicion. At the head of the room, the alien prince rose, his voice carrying. "Tonight we eat together," he said, "and we see if one table can hold the galaxy." The first dishes were served, the human walking among the tables, placing the plates himself. He met each gaze without fear, offering a nod, no grand speeches. Just the quiet confidence of someone who knew his craft. The room slowly filled with the sound of eating, the steam rising from the hot dishes, the frost curling from the cold ones. For a moment, it seemed it might work, until the first scream. A tall envoy from the Iron Waste stood, clutching his throat, his plate clattering to the floor. Voices rose, hands went to weapons. The human moved fast, reaching the envoy in seconds. He took the goblet from the envoy's hand, sniffed, and his eyes narrowed. The wine had been poisoned. The room erupted, accusations flying. Lord Varkath's name hissed from more than one mouth. But before anyone could act, the doors of the hall slammed open. The largest dragon stepped inside, its golden eyes burning. The room froze. The dragon lowered its head, inhaled deeply, and then swung it toward a table near the back, its massive claw pointing directly at a servant. The guards seized the figure, pulling back the hood to reveal not a servant, but an assassin from the rival Gal Empire. In his belt were vials of poison. The room buzzed with shock. The prince stood, his voice like steel. "This is the enemy's gift to us," he said. "But tonight they fail." The human chef turned back to the guests. "Eat," he said simply. "The food is safe." It was not just reassurance, it was challenge. Slowly, one by one, they picked up their utensils again, the taste returning them to the moment, the voices softening, the tension loosening. The feast lasted for hours, laughter breaking the silence. Stories traded across tables that had once been lines of war. The dragons lay curled at the edges of the hall, their massive heads resting near the guests, unthreatening, almost protective. When the last plates were cleared, the prince stood again. But this time, he stepped aside. "Tonight belongs to the Flamekeeper," he said, gesturing to the human. The chef said nothing for a long moment, then simply replied, "Food is not about power, it is about trust." His voice was calm, but the weight of it hung in the air. The leaders left the palace that night, not as allies, but no longer as enemies. It was enough. The prince knew it, and so did the dragons. Later, in the quiet of the empty kitchen, the largest dragon appeared once more, its deep voice rumbling in his mind. "You have changed them, as you changed us." The human smiled faintly, wiping down his counter. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe they were just hungry." The dragon's low chuckle rolled through the stone walls. Far above, the stars over Drakthir burned brighter than they had in years, and somewhere in the galaxy, stories were already being told, not of war, not of conquest, but of the night a human's dish tamed dragons and calmed kings. Known to kill each other over food, yet here they were, eating in harmony. The prince stood again, his voice ringing out. "This is more than cooking, human. You have calmed their blood." The words made the nobles uneasy. If dragons could be controlled by a man from Earth, then power in the galaxy could shift overnight. The chef met the prince's gaze and said nothing. When the dragons finally lay down, their massive bodies curling on the stone floor, the prince ordered the chef to his private chamber. "We will speak," he said, his tone unreadable. As they walked through the long corridors, the human could feel the eyes of guards and servants on his back. He knew that in this palace, every victory came with new dangers, and somewhere deep in the shadows of the palace, someone else had heard the dragons purr for the first time in years, and they were already planning how to take the human chef down. The alien prince's private chamber was a room of black stone and gold light, the walls carved with scenes of dragons burning cities, the ceiling so high that shadows clung like dark clouds above, in the center. A table of smooth obsidian reflected the flicker of candles. The prince sat at one end, the human chef at the other. Guards lined the walls, their armor shining like molten silver. The prince studied the man in silence for a long moment, his clawed fingers drumming on the table. "Your food does more than feed," he said at last. "It changes beasts." The human didn't answer right away, his calm gaze steady. "Good food changes everything, Your Highness," he said. "Even the fiercest creatures can be softened by taste." The prince leaned back, his sharp eyes glinting. Softened or controlled? It was not a question, it was a test. The human knew better than to take the bait. "My only aim is to cook well," he replied simply, but in his mind, he thought of the dragons, of the way they had eaten without fighting, of the way their breathing had slowed. Something about them had shifted, and he was certain it was no accident. That night, the prince ordered him to prepare a private meal, not for dragons, but for the royal court. Alien nobles from across the galaxy, each with different tastes, some with tongues that burned at the smallest spice, others who could only taste if the food was near frozen. To serve them all was a task no alien chef dared attempt, but the prince wanted to see if the human could do it. The kitchen was a storm of noise and heat when the human entered. Alien cooks moved around him like he wasn't there, some with open disdain, others pretending not to watch. He set his ingredients out carefully, but this time, they were different. He unpacked earth vegetables, grains, and cuts of meat none of the aliens had ever seen, their colors bright against the dark counters. A short, heavy alien with scales like stone leaned over his counter, smirking. "What is this, human? Toys for your planet's children?" The chef didn't look up. "It's food," he said. "Real food." He began to chop onions, their sharp scent rising, making several alien cooks wrinkle their noses. He cooked rice, slow and steady, letting each grain soak in flavor. He roasted vegetables with oil and herbs, their skins blistering and caramelizing under the heat. The scent began to move through the kitchen, pulling even the most dismissive cooks closer. Some pretended to pass by his station, but their eyes lingered on the golden brown crust of the meat, on the soft steam curling from the pot of rice. The human worked in silence, his hands moving with practiced ease. By the time the first dish was ready, the prince's guards had arrived to carry it to the grand dining hall. The human followed, walking past walls lined with banners of dragon empires. The hall itself was a spectacle, long tables stretching to the far wall, golden goblets filled with alien wines, and at the head, the prince's throne, carved from a single dragon skull. The nobles whispered as the first plate was set before them, its appearance simple compared to the towering, jewel-covered dishes they were used to. But the smell made them pause. They cut into the meat, the juices running rich and fragrant. The first noble took a bite, then froze, his eyes widening. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and took another bite without a word. One by one, the others followed. The hall grew quieter, replaced by the soft sounds of eating. Some leaned back in surprise, others leaned forward, as if guarding their plates. Even those who had mocked the human earlier were now scraping the last bits from their dishes. The prince watched it all, a small satisfied smile on his face. But not everyone was pleased. In the far corner, a tall alien with silver skin and cold eyes set his fork down untouched. His gaze fixed on the human chef, the prince noticed. "Is something wrong with your meal, Lord Varkath?" he asked. The silver-skinned alien's lips curled into a thin smile. "The food is dangerous," he said. "It makes one forget they are enemies. It makes one trust." His tone was not admiration, it was warning. The prince's smile faded slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he ordered more wine, more food. The feast continued, yet the human could feel the weight of Varkath's eyes on him all night. When the dinner ended, the nobles left murmuring about the strange new flavors. The prince dismissed his guards, but before the chef could leave, The prince spoke again. "You will cook for my dragons at dawn," he said. "But this time, I want something they have never tasted before." The human bowed slightly. "As you wish," he replied, already thinking of what he would prepare. As he returned to his quarters, the halls were quiet. But halfway there, he caught the faint scrape of claws on stone. He turned, but saw nothing in the shadows. A whisper of movement, then silence. Knew someone was following him, but whoever it was moved like smoke. When he reached his room, a small package was waiting on his table, wrapped in black cloth. He unwrapped it to find a knife, long, curved, and coated with something dark and sticky. A note lay beside it, written in jagged alien script. "The dragons may love you, human, but not all of us do." He held the knife in his hand for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then set it down carefully. He had fed dragons, impressed a prince, and silenced a court. But now, the real danger was beginning. The palace of Drakthar never truly slept, even at night. The glow of molten rivers around the city lit the sky. The dragons curled in their stone nests above the royal towers, their bodies rising and falling with slow, thunderous breaths. In the kitchens below, fires burned low, and the scent of smoke hung heavy in the air. The human chef lay awake in his chamber, staring at the black stone ceiling, the knife and the note still on the table beside him. He had cooked for kings before, but never in a place where a single bite could start a war or end a life, he knew. The warning wasn't idle. Someone in this palace wanted him gone. At dawn, a loud knock shook his door. A guard with bronze armor entered. "The prince summons you," he said, his voice flat. The human followed, walking through long corridors, lined with banners of past dragon wars. They reached the great hall, and this time, the scene was different. Instead of the usual small court, dozens of alien nobles filled the room, their robes bright with jeweled crests. The prince sat on his throne, a faint smile on his lips. "Today, human, you will cook for my dragons again," he said. "But you will do it in front of my rivals." The words landed heavy. The human understood. This was a show of power. If the dragons obeyed him in front of enemies, it would prove the prince's control, but it would also make him a target. The alien nobles watched him walk to the kitchen with cold eyes. Some whispered to each other, their words dripping with doubt. Others glared openly, as if already blaming him for something that hadn't happened yet. The kitchen itself felt tense. Alien cooks worked in silence. A few glanced at him with something sharper than curiosity, hate. He unpacked his tools and ingredients, this time adding something new, a jar of deep red powder, paprika from Earth, its warm scent different from the bitter alien spices. As he worked, he felt eyes on him, not just from the doorways, but from shadows between the shelves. His hands moved steadily, but he was listening, counting footsteps. That didn't match the rhythm of the cooks. He seasoned the meat slowly, letting the red powder coat it, the smell building until it filled the air. The dragons in the hall shifted, their claws scraping stone, their wings twitching. The sound made the nobles uneasy. The prince watched with sharp interest. Then it happened. As he reached for a pot, one of the side burners flared too high, the flames spitting upward, almost catching his sleeve. The human stepped back just in time, his eyes scanning the stove. The valve had been tampered with. A trap meant to burn him alive. He said nothing, instead moving to another station. But in his mind, the picture was clear. This was not a kitchen accident. He finished the dish with care, plating it on a slab of black stone, the meat glistening, the air thick with its scent. When he carried it into the great hall, all conversation stopped. The dragons rose to their feet, eyes locked on the plate. He placed it before them, and the largest dragon, the same one who had first eaten his food, stepped forward, its massive head lowering. The first bite was slow, deliberate, as if testing something. Then came the deep, rolling purr that made the floor hum under everyone's feet. The other dragons joined, eating in turns without fighting. The nobles stared in disbelief. One muttered, "Impossible." They are behaving, another whispered. If the prince controls his dragons like this, no one can challenge him.